Life and Adventures of Jack Engle, an Auto-Biography, in which the reader will find some familiar characters, by Walt Whitman. Read by Frank Blissett. Chapter 22. The history of my adventures draws to its conclusion. I have not much more to tell, and that I will dispatch quickly. It was natural enough that the love which had its rise in my mind toward the young Quakeress should take a course usual in such matters. But I forego the infliction of a courtship on whoever has traveled with me thus far. My attachment was returned, and in a few months after the last of the events already recorded, Violet, much to her satisfaction, gave my wedding supper to a few choice friends. The investigations of Wigglesworth had been so thorough, and he had so completely noted down, with date and volume and page, and every other particular, the links in the chain of evidence to substantiate the truth of Martha's rights, and of the history, as far as was needed in law, that has been narrated in the foregoing chapters, of the father and his death, together with his will and disposition of his property, all these were so minutely detailed and substantiated by references to authentic records of the courts and other unquestionable data, that we found no difficulty in settling the whole matter to our satisfaction. Martha had no near relative, and the few distant ones of whom she had heard, after her being taken charge of by Mrs. Covert, who seems to have been the very antipodes of her husband, even those far-away connections had lost sight of her, and she was left to depend much upon the good lady who, through her most helpless years, acted as her best friend and protector. The very means which the lawyer had hit upon to carry out his own wicked designs proved ultimately to be in our favor. I allude to the turning of so much of Martha's property into bonds and paper, as more convenient for transportation or concealment. The valuable bills and documents we had, in the manner before stated, secured possession of. That Covert made no attempt against his former ward after her flight is not perhaps surprising. He knew that she now had devoted friends, and that a legal investigation would result in an unavoidable exposure not at all to his credit. Besides, this would in all likelihood draw in its train other investigations and exposures, involving his schemes in conjunction with Ferris. To dismiss him here, I will add that from his distant Canada residence we never had any positive intelligence of him, and were satisfied best that it was so. Inez, for the few days that Martha stayed with her, showed all her natural goodness and generosity. Was it stopped a little when she saw, with female quickness, the sentiment that had grown up between Martha and myself? If so, it made no difference in her treatment of the Quakeress, and she was one of the liveliest of the merry company at my wedding supper. Whether Mr. Thomas Peterson consoled the excellent and really fine-hearted girl, I cannot aver of my own knowledge. But it was evident that they rapidly became great friends with one another. With the advance of the season, too, Inez was busy in her preparations for a professional tour, she having engagements that way. This tour engrossed her time and attention, and proved, I understand, a very profitable one. Tom Peterson's friendship, the noble and always welcome young man, has not been lost to me by marriage. He is much engaged in his trade as a machinist, which he is enthusiastically fond of, and he has become invaluable to the proprietors of the large establishment where he was foreman. The establishment is now merged in the property of a company with far greater capital, and the business much enlarged and perfected. Tom being advanced to a station of still greater confidence and trust, with a handsome salary to back it. Although this responsible post fills up his time pretty well, Tom finds leisure of a Sunday to come out in the stage to the cottage where we, for I cut any further connection with the law, have settled ourselves at a little distance from the city, and where we spend the summer. May your life be sunshiny, Tom Peterson, and the end of it a long while away. Ephraim Foster and Violet are well satisfied with all these developments, as, indeed, they are not easily induced to worry themselves with the course of affairs, so long as they have their health and a good living, and see their friends in the enjoyment of the same blessings. That beautiful philosophy! What a pity it is that we do not see more of it in this world of more imaginary than real troubles, great as the latter are. Ephraim, although years have passed with him since the period when he is first introduced in this narrative, is about the same old 2 and 6-penny. He sticks to his provision and grocery store, which, as I remarked in a previous chapter, has superseded the original milk and sausage line, and laughs at me when I propose to him to accept any pecuniary help and retire from public life. No, that he will not do at present, nor Violet either. They are very well satisfied. The employment just suits them, and the income is neither more or less than they want. And although no trust yet hangs up printed in white letters on a little dingy green board over the counter, Ephraim and Violet do trust, not only as much as in the early days, but a little more. Whenever the family is poor, or the father or mother sick, or when the appeal comes, as it often does, from some helpless widow, or even the wife of an intemperate husband, then neither does Ephraim put on a frown, nor Violet look the other way. The basket is silently heaped up, and there is no sulkiness to take away the blessing of the deed. Thus do these two cast their bread upon the waters, in faith and true charity. And although they make no sanctimonious professions, will they not find it again returned to them after many days? Violet, I think, grows really beautiful as she approaches the latter part of middle age. She is still as stout, strong, and healthy as ever, and, most important fact of all, which I ought to have jotted down before, during the years that I have been recording the events of the past narrative, has presented her lord and master with 2 hearty boys, one of whom is 6 and the other 3 years old, the biggest being named Jack Engle Foster. The advent and growth of these plump and jolly little fellows, however, and the interest taken in them by father and mother, never subtracted a particle from my own portion. And as to Master Jack, who always showed a tenacious attachment to me, he spends nearly the whole summer at our cottage. I look forward at an early day to the privilege of introducing him to some additional society. The young gentleman, indeed, teases me now and then on this subject, and asks me whether I will not hurry and make that little playfellow for him. I have no way of answering, except to assure the child that I will do my best, and that I confidently promise the gift to him in due time. The persevering youngster then asks me whether it is already begun, and will only be satisfied with my direct assertion to that effect. Nathaniel, too, and his canine friend are occasionally among my visitors. Nat grows in grace daily, and has found a much better situation than the one he held in Covert's office. He will make a fast man, this Nat, when he grows big enough. Calvin Peterson adheres faithfully to his professions, and continues to exercise his lungs at the revival meetings. I have before remarked that Calvin is a sincere worshipper in his own way, and that's more than can be said of many of the children of the church. Fitzmore Smith and Ferris, some time afterward, commenced business under the firm of Ferris and Company, brokers. The last I heard of them was through a paragraph in the paper, in which they were hauled up before a police court at the suit of a returned Californian for some semi-swindling. They paid their fine, quietly took the rebuke of the judge, and kept on as before. Barney and Nancy Fox regularly create an addition to the census with each recurring year. Barney, since he got started, has grown into a man of means and importance. He is a thorough hand at electioneering, and possesses some advantages not commonly enjoyed in that profound science. There is even talk of putting Barney in nomination for quite an important municipal office. Madame Selini, almost on the heels of Covert's sudden departure, went abroad, she said, for the purpose of taking possession of an inheritance. What truth there was in that part of the stay I know not, but Rebecca accompanied her, and that forever broke up the pleasant intimacy between Tom Peterson and the pretty Jewess. With everything promising fair for a life of health and comfort, though no one can tell what the future may bring forth, with blessings on my lot, and on those who have stood my friends when I most needed them, with good humor toward all the world, a heart full of satisfaction, and pockets that do not flutter from lightness, Jack Engle here closeth the narrative of his life and adventures. That was Chapter 22 of Life and Adventures of Jack Engle, an Autobiography, in which the reader will find some familiar characters, by Walt Whitman. Read by Frank Blissett.